Tonight, as the city of London sleeps beneath soft streetlights and distant echoes of traffic, we gently drift backward, far beyond modern buildings, beyond written memory, and into the quiet layers of earth beneath Trafalgar Square. What rests below this familiar landmark is not merely stone and soil, but the accumulated whispers of ancient humans, forgotten rituals, lost rivers, and civilizations that rose, vanished, and were buried by time itself. This is not a story of battles and kings alone, but of humanity's earliest footsteps, slowly fading into the ground beneath one of the world's most famous squares, long before the sound of footsteps echoed across Trafalgar Square, long before stone monuments, traffic lights, or written memory. This land existed in silence. The ground beneath what is now central London once lay exposed to open skies, untouched by walls or names, shaped only by wind, water, and time. To understand what lies beneath Trafalgar Square today, one must travel backward, not in years, but in tens of thousands of years, into a world where Britain itself was barely recognizable at that time. There was no city, no river embankment, no Thames as we know it. Instead, the land was part of a vast shifting wilderness connected to mainland Europe. Britain was not an island yet. It was a peninsula joined to the continent by a broad stretch of low-lying land historians now call Doggerland. Across this ancient plain, animals migrated freely: mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, wild horses, and early humans followed quietly behind them. The climate was harsh, then mild, then harsh again, cycling through long ice ages and brief warm periods. Massive glaciers advanced from the north, grinding rock into dust, carving valleys, and flattening hills. When the ice retreated, it left behind layers of clay, gravel, and silt materials that still exist beneath London today. Trafalgar Square rests upon these deep geological memories, compressed under centuries of human construction. During the coldest periods, ice sheets stretched across much of northern Britain. The land near present-day London sat just beyond the glacier's edge, caught in a frozen borderland known as periglacial tundra. The soil was hard, often frozen year-round, and vegetation was sparse, mostly grasses, mosses, and low shrubs. Strong winds swept across the open terrain, carrying fine dust that slowly settled into the earth. As the climate warmed, ice melted and rivers were born. Water carved paths through the softened land, reshaping it again and again. The early Thames was not a single controlled river, but a wide, braided system of channels, marshes, and seasonal floodplains. It shifted its course over millennia, sometimes flowing north of its current path, sometimes south, depositing layers of sediment wherever it passed. Near the area that would eventually become Trafalgar Square, the land gently rose above the floodplain. This higher ground remained dry during seasonal floods, making it an ideal place for animals to rest and for humans to observe them. Long before buildings claimed this space, it was a quiet overlook of open grassland and slow-moving water. The first humans to walk this land did not know it as London. They had no maps, no borders, no cities. They were small groups of hunter-gatherers moving slowly across the landscape, following animals, seasons, and memory. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans arrived in southern Britain more than 800,000 years ago, during a warm interglacial period. These early inhabitants belonged to ancient human species, ancestors of modern humans whose names we assign long after their passing. They left no written records, no monuments. What remains of their presence is subtle stone tools shaped by hand, fragments of bone, faint traces buried deep beneath layers of earth. These tools, often found along ancient riverbanks, tell a quiet story of survival. Simple hand axes, carefully chipped from flint, reveal planning, patience, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Flint was abundant in southern Britain, and early humans learned to recognize it in riverbeds and eroding cliffs. They struck it with precise force, creating sharp edges used for cutting meat, scraping hides, and shaping wood. Each tool was carried, reused, and eventually discarded when it broke or was lost. Over thousands of years, these discarded tools accumulated, slowly sinking into the soil. At night, these early humans gathered near small fires, likely sheltered by natural rises in the land or clusters of trees. The fire offered warmth, protection from predators, and a place of quiet gathering. The glow of flames reflected off stone tools and watchful eyes, while the darkness beyond remained vast and unknown. The animals of this ancient world were both resource and threat. Herds of mammoths moved slowly across open plains, their heavy footsteps leaving impressions in soft ground. Woolly rhinoceroses grazed nearby, while cave lions and hyenas watched from a distance. Humans hunted carefully, often scavenging rather than confronting large animals directly. Cooperation was essential. Survival depended not on strength, but on observation, timing, and shared effort. As thousands of years passed, the climate shifted again. Ice returned, pushing humans southward or forcing them to adapt. During the coldest periods, Britain became uninhabitable. Humans retreated, leaving the land to ice and wind. When warmth returned, so did life. Animals migrated back. Humans followed once more. The cycle repeated many times. Each return added new layers to the land, new tools, new camps, new footprints erased by time. Beneath Trafalgar Square, these layers exist like pages in a book pressed tightly together, unread for millennia. By around 12,000 years ago, the last ice age began to fade. Temperatures rose steadily. Ice melted, and sea levels began to rise. The low-lying land connecting Britain to Europe slowly flooded. Rivers widened. Marshes expanded. Eventually, Britain became an island, separated from the continent by water. The Thames took on a more stable form, flowing toward the sea. Forests spread across the landscape: oak, hazel, birch, and pine. The open tundra transformed into dense woodland. Animals changed as well. Mammoths disappeared. Deer, boar, and smaller mammals became common. Human life changed with the environment. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers adapted to forest living. They built temporary shelters, fished rivers, and hunted smaller game. They knew the land intimately, recognizing seasonal patterns and animal behavior. The higher ground near present-day Trafalgar Square remained a useful vantage point, dry and accessible. Over time, humans began to shape the land more intentionally. By the Neolithic period, farming arrived. Forests were cleared. Fields were planted. Permanent settlements formed. Though no large village existed exactly where Trafalgar Square now stands, the surrounding region supported growing communities. The soil beneath the square holds traces of these transformations: pollen grains from ancient plants, charcoal from early fires, microscopic remains that allow scientists to reconstruct past environments. Each layer tells a quiet story of change, recorded without words. What makes this place remarkable is not a single dramatic event, but continuity. For tens of thousands of years, humans returned to this landscape again and again. Each generation built upon the remnants of the last, unaware that their lives would one day be buried beneath stone and history. When Roman engineers later built Londinium, and medieval builders raised churches and markets, they unknowingly rested their foundations on this deep past. Beneath the pavement of Trafalgar Square lie not only Roman roads and medieval remains, but far older memories: glacial gravel, ancient riverbeds, and the silent traces of humanity's earliest steps. Even today, as buses pass and tourists gather, the ground below remains still. It holds the weight of time without complaint. It remembers a world before names, before borders, before London itself existed. And as night falls over the square, and the city grows quieter, the ancient land beneath continues to rest unshaken. unchanged, waiting patiently beneath the surface, as it has for thousands upon thousands of years. Long before the Thames was confined by stone embankments or crossed by bridges, it moved freely across a wide and restless valley. Its waters shifted with the seasons, sometimes spreading into marshes, sometimes narrowing into slow, reflective channels. Along its banks, long before the idea of a city existed, small groups of humans passed quietly through the land. They left no buildings behind, no walls, no written names. What remains of them is subtle and easily missed, yet their presence shaped the earliest human story of the land that would one day become central London. These were the first humans of the Thames Valley. Paleolithic and Mesolithic people whose lives were defined by movement, patience, and deep awareness of their surroundings. They did not settle permanently. Instead, they followed patterns older than memory, animal migrations, seasonal plant growth, and the slow rhythm of water and weather. Their world was wide, open, and often unforgiving. Yet they learned to survive within it with remarkable skill. Archaeological discoveries along the Thames suggest that humans were present here during warmer intervals of the Ice Age, returning again and again when the climate allowed. These early visitors belonged to ancient human species and later to anatomically modern humans. Though separated by thousands of years, their lives shared similar rhythms. They traveled light, carried only what they could hold, and relied on tools made from stone, bone, and wood. The most enduring evidence of their presence lies in stone tools. Along ancient river terraces and gravel beds, archaeologists have uncovered hand axes, scrapers, blades, and flakes shaped carefully from flint. Each tool represents not just function, but intention. The maker selected a stone, struck it at precise angles, and shaped it with a mental plan in mind. These tools were not random. They reflected learned techniques passed quietly from one generation to the next. Flint tools found near the Thames often show signs of repeated use. Edges were sharpened again and again until the stone could no longer hold a clean blade. This suggests that tools were valued possessions, carried across long distances. A hunter might keep the same hand axe for months or even years, relying on it for cutting meat, breaking bones, and preparing hides. Life near the river offered many advantages. The Thames Valley provided water, fish, birds, and fertile ground that attracted grazing animals. Herds of deer, wild horses, and ancient cattle moved along the river corridors, following familiar paths. Early humans learned these patterns and timed their movements accordingly. Camps were placed with care, close enough to water for daily needs, yet high enough to avoid flooding. These camps were temporary and quiet. There were no permanent structures, only simple shelters made from branches, hides, and grass. They were built quickly and abandoned just as easily. When a group moved on, nature reclaimed the space. Wind erased footprints. Rain softened the ground. Within a short time, there was little visible evidence that anyone had been there at all. Fire was central to life in these camps. Small hearths provided warmth, light, and protection from predators. Fire allowed humans to cook meat, making it easier to digest and safer to eat. It hardened wooden tools, preserved food through drying, and created a shared space for rest and observation. At night, people gathered near the fire in silence, listening to the sounds of the surrounding land. The firelight revealed faces, tools, and quiet gestures. Communication was likely simple but effective: gestures, expressions, and spoken sounds shaped by shared experience. Knowledge was transmitted not through writing, but through demonstration and repetition. A child learned how to shape stone by watching. A hunter learned animal behavior by walking alongside elders. Hunting was rarely a dramatic chase. More often, it involved patience. Humans observed animals from a distance, waiting for weakness or opportunity. They followed wounded or sick individuals. They trapped smaller animals and gathered eggs, roots, berries, and edible plants. Survival depended on flexibility rather than force. Along the Thames, fishing became increasingly important over time. Early humans crafted simple spears, hooks, and nets from natural materials. Fish provided a reliable source of food, especially during seasons when game was scarce. Shellfish collected from riverbanks also contributed to the diet, leaving behind subtle traces that archaeologists still uncover. The Mesolithic period marked a gradual shift in human behavior as the climate stabilized after the last ice age. Forests expanded across southern Britain, transforming the open landscape into dense woodland. With this change came new tools and techniques. Smaller, finely crafted stone blades, known as microliths, were developed and set into wooden shafts to create arrows and spears. These innovations allowed humans to hunt more effectively in forested environments. Instead of pursuing large herds across open plains, hunters focused on smaller, faster animals moving through dense vegetation. Knowledge of animal trails, feeding grounds, and seasonal habits became even more important. The Thames Valley remained a vital corridor through this changing world. It connected inland forests to coastal regions and provided a stable route for movement and communication. Human groups encountered one another along the river, sharing information, materials, and perhaps even stories. Though there were no permanent settlements, the land was far from empty. Evidence suggests that certain locations were visited repeatedly over generations. A bend in the river, a dry rise above a floodplain, or a place where animals regularly crossed water could become a familiar stopping point. Over time, these places accumulated traces of human activity, discarded tools, hearth remains, and worn paths. It is possible that the higher ground near what is now Trafalgar Square served such a purpose. Elevated enough to remain dry, yet close to river resources, it would have offered a convenient place to rest, observe, and prepare for travel. Though no dramatic ruins remain, the absence of evidence does not imply absence of life. These people lived lightly, leaving little behind. Ritual and belief likely played a quiet role in daily life. While there is no direct evidence of complex religion during the Paleolithic and Mesolithic periods, archaeologists have found indications of symbolic behavior. Carefully placed objects, repeated use of certain sites, and deliberate burial practices suggest that early humans held beliefs about life, death, and the unseen world. Fire itself may have carried symbolic meaning, representing safety and continuity. The act of maintaining a flame, carrying embers from one camp to another, connected groups across time and space. The fire was never simply allowed to die if it could be preserved. As centuries passed, sea levels continued to rise, slowly reshaping the landscape. Low-lying areas flooded. The connection to mainland Europe disappeared. Britain became an island, and the human groups living here adapted once again. Resources changed, migration routes shifted, but the Thames remained a familiar presence in an evolving world. The people of the Thames Valley lived without awareness of their place in history. They did not know that future cities would rise above their paths, or that their tools would one day be studied under laboratory lights. Their concerns were immediate and practical: food, warmth, safety, and the passing of seasons, yet their impact was profound. They established the first human relationship with this land. They learned its patterns, respected its dangers, and depended upon its gifts. Every later generation, from farmers to Romans to modern Londoners, would inherit a landscape already shaped by human attention. Beneath modern streets, traces of these earliest lives remain. They are buried deep beneath layers of soil, construction, and time. But they are not gone. They wait quietly, just as the people who left them once waited by the river, watching the water move slowly past as night settles over the Thames today. And the city grows still. The ancient valley remains beneath it all. The river continues its journey, unaware of centuries. And far below, the silent camps of the first humans rest undisturbed, holding their place in the long, unbroken story of human presence. As the long cycles of ice and retreat finally settled into a warmer and more stable world, human life in southern Britain began to change in quiet but permanent ways. The roaming existence of earlier hunter-gatherers slowly gave way to something new, something rooted, patient, and deliberate. This transformation, known to archaeologists as the Neolithic period, marked one of the most profound shifts in human history. It was during this time that the land around the ancient Thames, including the ground that would one day support Trafalgar Square, began to take on meanings beyond survival alone. The Neolithic world was still quiet by modern standards. There were no cities, no written language, no large structures of stone or brick. Yet the people of this age carried within them new ideas about land, time, ancestry, and the unseen forces shaping their lives. The earth was no longer just a place to pass through. It became something to tend, to remember, and in many cases, to revere. Farming arrived gradually in Britain around 6,000 years ago, brought by migrating communities and shared knowledge rather than sudden conquest. Forests were carefully cleared using stone axes, opening small patches of land for cultivation. Early crops such as wheat and barley were planted and harvested by hand. Animals like cattle, sheep, and pigs were domesticated, altering the rhythm of daily life. This shift toward agriculture encouraged people to remain in one place for longer periods. Seasonal camps evolved into semi-permanent settlements. Simple houses were built from timber, clay, and thatch. These structures left faint traces in the soil post holes, hearths, and compacted floors nearly invisible unless carefully studied. The land itself became a record of human intention. Paths worn by repeated use connected fields, water sources, and living spaces. These paths were not random. They followed natural contours, avoided wetlands, and linked places of importance. Over generations, some paths took on deeper meaning, becoming ceremonial routes rather than simple walkways. Near the Thames Valley, the landscape offered a blend of fertile soil, fresh water, and elevated ground. The area around modern Trafalgar Square sat slightly above the surrounding floodplain, making it naturally appealing. While no large Neolithic settlement has been conclusively identified at that precise location, the surrounding region shows clear signs of human activity and ritual use. Neolithic people saw the land as alive with meaning. Hills, rivers, groves of trees, and unusual geological features were often associated with spiritual significance. These natural landmarks served as points of orientation, not just in space, but in belief. The Thames itself may have been viewed as a living presence, a boundary, a pathway, and a source of renewal. One of the most enduring traces of Neolithic belief lies in burial practices. Unlike earlier periods where human remains are rare or scattered, the Neolithic era produced intentional burials and monuments for the dead. Long barrows, elongated mounds of earth and stone were constructed to house the remains of multiple individuals. These were not hidden graves but visible landmarks, meant to endure. Burial sites were often placed in prominent locations, visible from afar or aligned with natural features. The dead were not separated from the living. Instead, they remained present within the landscape. Ancestors were believed to influence fertility, weather, and communal well-being. Caring for the dead was, in many ways, caring for the future. Although no long barrow stands beneath Trafalgar Square today, the concept of sacred ground is not limited to monumental structures. Archaeologists have discovered ritual deposits in rivers, pits, and natural hollows across southern Britain. Objects such as pottery, tools, animal bones, and occasionally human remains were deliberately placed into the earth or water. These deposits were not garbage. They were offerings. Items of value were given up intentionally, suggesting acts of gratitude, remembrance, or appeal to unseen forces. The Thames, in particular, became a repository for such offerings over thousands of years. a practice that would continue into later periods. The act of placing objects into the ground reflects a worldview in which the earth was not passive. It was a participant in human life. Giving something back to the land acknowledged dependence and respect. The soil beneath our feet was both provider and guardian. Neolithic rituals were likely quiet affairs. There is little evidence of grand ceremonies or centralized religious authority. Instead, belief was woven into daily activity: planting, harvesting, building, and burying. Seasonal cycles were observed closely. The movement of the sun and moon, the return of animals, and the growth of crops were all signs of a larger order. Some Neolithic structures across Britain, such as stone circles and causewayed enclosures, demonstrate an awareness of celestial patterns. While no such structure has been found beneath Trafalgar Square, it is possible that nearby open areas served as gathering places aligned with seasonal events. These gatherings may have reinforced social bonds and shared beliefs. The construction of causewayed enclosures, large circular spaces defined by ditches and banks, suggests communal effort and planning. These sites were not fortifications, but places of meeting, feasting, and ritual exchange. The act of digging and shaping earth together carried symbolic weight, reinforcing connection to the land. As farming spread, ownership and inheritance became important concepts. Land was no longer simply used. It was passed down. Boundaries emerged, marked by natural features or constructed markers. This sense of continuity strengthened the bond between people and place. The soil beneath central London holds microscopic evidence of these changes. Pollen analysis reveals shifts from wild woodland species to cultivated plants. Charcoal fragments indicate controlled burning for land clearance. These scientific clues allow modern researchers to reconstruct ancient landscapes with remarkable detail. Over time, spiritual beliefs evolved alongside social complexity. Ritual practices became more varied. Some sites were revisited for centuries, accumulating layers of meaning. Others faded from use, remembered only in stories that eventually vanished. What makes the Neolithic period beneath Trafalgar Square so compelling is not certainty, but possibility. Archaeology often deals in fragments, partial truths shaped by what survives. The absence of large structures does not mean the absence of sacred meaning. Many rituals leave no physical trace beyond intention itself. Imagine a quiet dawn thousands of years ago. Mist rises from the Thames. A small group walks slowly along a familiar path, carrying simple offerings. They stop at a place known to their ancestors, a place marked by memory rather than stone. Words are spoken softly, if at all. Objects are placed into the earth. The land receives them in silence. These moments, repeated across generations, shaped the spiritual geography of the region. Even as later cultures arrived, Bronze Age farmers, Iron Age tribes, Roman settlers, the deeper memory of sacred landscapes persisted. Sometimes absorbed, sometimes forgotten. By the end of the Neolithic period, Britain was fully transformed. Forests had retreated. Fields expanded. Communities became more structured. Yet the land retained its layered history. Beneath each new path lay older ones. Beneath each dwelling, earlier footprints remained. The ground beneath Trafalgar Square is not merely soil. It is a record of belief as much as labor. It holds the quiet imprint of people who saw the world not as separate from themselves, but as something shared, respected, and deeply meaningful. Today, the square is defined by stone, monuments, and motion. But beneath that surface lies a far older stillness, a time when the earth itself was sacred, and every step taken upon it carried significance. As night settles over modern London, and the noise of the city softens, the Neolithic world rests undisturbed below. Its rituals are forgotten, its paths erased, yet its presence remains. The land remembers, even when we do not. And so, beneath Trafalgar Square, beneath centuries of history. The ancient ground continues to hold its silence patient, enduring, and quietly sacred, long before Roman legions marched into Britain. Before stone roads and written laws reshaped the land, the region around the Thames was shaped by people who left no written history of their own. These were the Celtic tribes of Iron Age Britain, communities bound together by kinship, memory, ritual, and an intimate relationship with the landscape. Their world was one of fields and forests, rivers and hills, stories and songs, passed carefully from one generation to the next by the Iron Age. Beginning around 800 BCE, Britain was no longer a quiet frontier. It was a populated land, divided into territories held by tribes whose names survive only through later Roman accounts and archaeological clues. In the region surrounding the lower Thames lived groups such as the Trinovantes and the Catavillani, powerful tribal confederations that controlled trade routes, farmland, and river crossings. The land that would one day become London was not yet a city, but it was not insignificant. The Thames served as a natural highway, connecting inland Britain to the wider world beyond the sea. Along its banks, people traded goods, exchanged ideas, and shared customs. The river marked boundaries, but it also united communities through movement and commerce. Iron Age settlements were typically small and dispersed. Roundhouses made of timber and thatch clustered within open landscapes rather than dense towns. These communities relied on farming, raising cattle and sheep, and cultivating grains. Iron tools allowed for more efficient agriculture, changing how the land was worked and how surplus was managed. Yet life was not defined by labor alone. The Celtic worldview was deeply symbolic. Land was not merely owned. It was inhabited by meaning. Certain places, groves, springs, hilltops, river bends, were understood to possess spiritual power. These locations were approached with respect and caution, often set apart from ordinary daily use. The area near the Thames, including the higher ground around what is now Trafalgar Square, may have been valued not for settlement, but for its position within the spiritual geography of the region. Elevated ground overlooking water carried symbolic significance. It offered perspective, visibility, and separation from the ordinary world below. Celtic religion was not centered on temples in the modern sense. Instead, sacred space was defined by nature itself. Classical Roman writers later described druids performing rituals in forest clearings and near bodies of water. While these accounts must be treated carefully, archaeological evidence supports the idea that natural environments played a central role in spiritual life. Druids were not simply priests. They were keepers of law, history, and tradition. Their knowledge was preserved through oral memory rather than writing. This was intentional. Sacred knowledge was meant to live in the minds of the initiated, shaped by repetition and recitation. Rather than fixed on stone or parchment, oral tradition required patience and discipline. Stories were learned slowly, often over many years. Genealogies, laws, myths, and moral teachings were encoded into narrative and poetry. In this way, history was not a static record, but a living performance, adapted slightly with each telling while preserving its core meaning. The myths themselves reflected a worldview in which the natural and supernatural were closely intertwined. Rivers could be gods. Hills could be ancestors. The boundary between the human world and the other world was thin and permeable. Certain times of year, particularly seasonal, transitions were believed to open passages between realms. The Thames may have been seen as such a boundary. Archaeological finds reveal a long tradition of depositing objects into rivers during the Iron Age. Weapons, tools, jewelry, and ceremonial items were placed deliberately into the water, often in places where currents slowed or changed direction. These were not accidents. They were acts of offering. To give something valuable to the river was to acknowledge its power. The act recognized the river as a living force, capable of granting protection, fertility, or favor. Over time, these offerings accumulated, layer upon layer, forming an invisible archive beneath the water's surface. The land near modern Trafalgar Square, though not directly on the riverbank, sat within this broader sacred landscape. Paths leading from inland settlements toward the Thames would have passed through open ground, some of which may have served as gathering or meeting places. These were spaces of transition, where people prepared themselves mentally and spiritually before approaching the water. Iron Age communities placed great importance on boundaries, between territories, between seasons, between worlds. Crossing a boundary required ritual awareness. Even travel itself could be seen as a meaningful act, guided by tradition and story. Social life revolved around communal gatherings. Feasts marked important events such as harvests, alliances, and rites of passage. These gatherings reinforced identity and memory. Food was shared, stories were told. Songs carried history forward. Archaeological evidence of feasting includes large quantities of animal bones found in specific locations, suggesting deliberate communal consumption rather than everyday meals. These events were moments when the tribe reaffirmed its connection to land and ancestors. Death, too, was deeply ritualized. Iron Age burial practices varied, but many involved careful placement of the body and accompanying objects. Some individuals were buried with weapons or personal items, indicating beliefs about status or the afterlife. Others were cremated, their remains placed in urns and buried in specific locations. Burial sites were often positioned in relation to landscape features, near rivers, on hills, or along established routes. The dead remained part of the living world, their presence shaping how land was used and remembered. It is possible that certain areas near central London were avoided for ordinary settlement, precisely because they held symbolic weight. Sacred ground was not meant to be occupied casually. It was visited, respected, and sometimes left deliberately empty. Iron Age Britain was not isolated. Trade networks connected tribes to continental Europe. Goods such as wine, metalwork, and decorative items moved along the Thames and across the Channel. With them came ideas, styles, and influences that blended with local traditions. Despite this contact, Celtic culture remained distinct. Its values emphasized balance with nature, respect for ancestry, and the power of spoken word. Change was gradual, absorbed carefully into existing frameworks of belief. As the Iron Age progressed, tribal territories became more defined. Power consolidated among elite families. Hillforts emerged as centers of authority and refuge, though not all communities lived within them. These structures symbolized control, protection, and identity. The land that would later host London lay at the edge of several tribal spheres. It was a place of interaction rather than domination. This liminal quality may have contributed to its symbolic importance. When Roman scouts and merchants first encountered this region, they entered a world already rich with meaning. The land was mapped not by coordinates, but by story. Every bend in the river, every rise in the ground, carried memory. The Romans would later rename, rebuild, and redefine this space. But beneath their foundations lay an older map, one drawn in oral memory and ritual practice. Today, no visible trace of Celtic shrines or gathering places remains beneath Trafalgar Square. Yet absence does not equal emptiness. The Iron Age left its mark not in monuments, but in patterns of movement, avoidance, and reverence. The ground remembers, even when stone does not. Beneath layers of Roman roads, medieval streets, and modern pavement lies a landscape once shaped by myth and memory. As night falls over London and the city's noise slowly fades, the ancient world of the Celts rests below. Their stories are no longer spoken aloud, but their presence lingers in the course of the river, in the shape of the land, and in the quiet spaces that once held meaning beyond words. And so, before Rome, before London, before history was written down, this place already mattered. It mattered to those who walked it in silence, who spoke its stories into the air, and who trusted the land to remember what they could not write. When the Roman Empire first turned its attention toward Britain, the land around the Thames was already ancient with memory. Tribes had lived there for centuries, paths had been walked for generations, and the river itself carried stories far older than Rome. Yet when Roman soldiers arrived in the mid-1st century CE, they brought with them a new way of shaping land, one based on order, measurement, and permanence. It was during this time that Londinium was born, not as a gradual evolution, but as a deliberate act of empire. The Romans did not choose locations randomly. They sought places that balanced strategic advantage with economic potential. The Thames offered both. At a point where the river could be crossed, yet still allowed access to the sea, the Romans established a bridge and beside it, a settlement. This settlement would grow into Londinium, the ancestor of modern London. At first, Londinium was modest. It consisted of timber buildings, dirt streets, and a small population of soldiers, merchants, craftsmen, and local Britons adapting to Roman rule. But even in its earliest days, the Roman presence introduced something new to the landscape: a grid. Streets were laid out with intention. Space was divided, measured, and assigned purpose. Roman roads were among the most enduring features of their occupation. Built with layers of stone, gravel, and compacted earth, these roads were designed to last. They connected Londinium to the wider province of Britannia, linking it to forts, towns, and ports. Some of these routes still influence the layout of modern London streets, though they now lie hidden beneath asphalt and concrete. The active road building reshaped daily life. Movement became predictable. Trade increased. Goods flowed more efficiently along these paths: grain, pottery, wine, oil, metalwork. Londinium grew quickly, becoming a commercial hub rather than a purely military outpost. Wooden structures soon gave way to more durable materials. Brick, stone, and tile appeared. Warehouses lined the riverbank. Workshops produced goods for local use and export. Homes varied in quality, from simple dwellings to larger townhouses with mosaic floors and painted walls. Life in Romang Londinium followed a steady rhythm. Markets opened in the morning. Artisans worked at their trades. Children learned skills from their families. Public spaces served as centers of social interaction. Though the city was far from the grand capitals of the empire, it carried the unmistakable imprint of Roman culture. Water management was essential. Wells were dug. Drains and sewers carried waste away from populated areas. These systems required planning and maintenance, reflecting Roman confidence in engineering. Even today, fragments of Roman drainage systems remain buried beneath London, silent witnesses to ancient practicality. Religion played a central role in Roman life, and Londinium was no exception. Temples were built to honor Roman gods such as Jupiter, Mars, and Minerva. These structures were places of ritual, offering, and communal gathering. Incense burned. Animals were sacrificed. Prayers were spoken for protection, success, and favor. At the same time, Roman religion was adaptable. Local deities were often incorporated into Roman practice, their identities blended with familiar gods. Celtic River. Spirits, healing gods, and protective figures found new expression within Roman frameworks. This blending allowed Roman authority to coexist more smoothly with existing beliefs. The Thames itself continued to receive offerings. Archaeological finds from the river include coins, figurines, and personal items deliberately placed into the water. For Romans and Britons alike, the river remained a powerful presence, worthy of respect and ritual. As Londinium expanded, public buildings appeared. A forum was constructed, serving as the administrative and commercial heart of the city. Nearby stood a basilica, where legal matters were addressed and officials conducted business. These structures symbolized Roman order and governance, anchoring imperial authority in stone. Bathhouses provided spaces for hygiene, relaxation, and socialization. Heated rooms, warm pools, and cold plunges reflected Roman attitudes toward health and leisure. Bathing was a communal activity, bringing together people of different backgrounds and shared routines. The population of Londinium was diverse. Soldiers from across the empire served in Britain. Merchants arrived from Gaul, Spain, and beyond. Local Britons adopted Roman customs to varying degrees. Languages mixed. Accents filled the streets. The city was alive with movement and quiet ambition. Despite its growth, Londinium was not immune to instability. In the years 60 or 61 CE, the city was destroyed during a rebellion led by Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe. Buildings were burned. Streets were covered in ash. Archaeologists still find this destruction layer beneath London, a thin, dark line marking a moment of sudden violence. The Romans eventually rebuilt Londinium, larger and more fortified than before. A defensive wall was constructed around the city, signaling its importance and vulnerability. Within these walls, life resumed, shaped by lessons learned. Over the following centuries, Londinium thrived. Trade increased. Infrastructure improved. Temples were renovated. New buildings rose atop old ones. Each phase of construction added another layer to the ground beneath the city. These layers are what make Roman London so tangible today. In some places, Roman walls, roads, and foundations lie only a few meters below modern streets. Construction projects occasionally uncover fragments of mosaic floors, stone columns, or everyday objects, shoes, tools. Writing tablets preserved by time. The area around modern Trafalgar Square lay just beyond the main core of Roman Londinium. It was not densely built but remained connected through roads and paths. This peripheral position meant that Roman activity still touched the area. Even if monumental buildings did not dominate it, Roman burial practices placed cemeteries outside city walls, often along roads leading out of town. Graves lined these routes, reminding travelers of mortality and memory. Though most Roman burials near central London have been disturbed or lost, their existence shaped how space was organized out. As centuries passed, the Roman Empire began to weaken. Trade slowed. Military presence diminished. Maintenance of infrastructure declined. By the early 5th century, Roman authority in Britain collapsed. Londinium did not vanish overnight. But without imperial support, the city gradually emptied. Buildings fell into disrepair. Streets filled with debris. Roofs collapsed. Nature began to reclaim space. What remained was a landscape layered with abandoned stone, broken tile, and forgotten foundations. Over time, soil accumulated. Plants grew. The city became quieter, its Roman past sinking beneath the surface. Yet those Roman layers never disappeared. They remain beneath London today, forming a buried city within the modern one. Each new generation built atop the last, often unaware of what lay below. When medieval builders laid foundations, they encountered Roman walls. When modern engineers dig tunnels, they uncover Roman roads. The past is never far away. Beneath Trafalgar Square, the Roman presence is subtle but real. The ground carries traces of roads once walked by soldiers and merchants. It holds fragments of a world that believed in order, ritual, and permanence. As night falls over the square, and the city's sounds soften, the Roman city rests beneath the surface. Its temples no longer echo with prayer. Its roads no longer carry carts. But its foundations endure. They endure as part of a long, continuous story, a story written not only in books, but in soil and stone. A story that waits quietly beneath modern streets, patient and unchanged. And so, Roman Londinium remains, not as ruins to be seen, but as layers to be remembered, buried, yet never truly gone. When Roman authority finally withdrew from Britain in the early 5th century, it did not do so with ceremony or finality. There was no single moment when Londinium ceased to exist. no formal declaration that ended its story. Instead, the city faded slowly, almost gently, into silence. What followed was not an age of sudden destruction, but a long and quiet retreat, a period during which one of Britain's most important cities nearly vanished beneath time itself. For nearly 4 centuries, Roman administration had provided structure. Roads were maintained. Walls were guarded. Trade connected Londinium to distant provinces. When that system collapsed, the foundations of urban life weakened almost immediately. Soldiers were recalled. Officials departed. Coinage became scarce. Without the machinery of empire, the city struggled to sustain itself. People did not flee all at once. Some remained, adapting to a world without centralized authority. Others moved away gradually, returning to rural settlements where food and security were easier to manage. Over decades, Londinium thinned. Buildings fell into disrepair. Roof tiles slipped. Timber beams rotted. Streets once busy with carts and footsteps grew quiet. The great Roman structures, the basilica, the forum, the bathhouses did not collapse dramatically. They simply aged without care. Rain entered through broken roofs. Frost widened cracks in stone. Plants took root in neglected corners. Nature, long held at bay by maintenance and order, began its slow return. The defensive walls still stood, but they guarded very little. Inside them, space opened up. Animals wandered where people once gathered. Grass grew between paving stones. Trees sprouted from collapsed masonry. Londinium became a shell of its former self, a city without a city's life. This period, often called post-Roman Britain, is sometimes misunderstood as chaotic or violent. In reality, it was mostly quiet. The archaeological record suggests not widespread destruction, but abandonment. People left behind what they could no longer support. What remained was slowly absorbed by earth and vegetation. It is during this long silence that one of the most intriguing features of London's buried history formed: the dark earth. This layer, found beneath many parts of the city, including areas near Trafalgar Square, represents centuries of gradual accumulation. It is composed of decomposed organic material, soil, and debris from decaying buildings. Unlike the sharply defined layers left by Roman construction or later medieval development, dark earth is soft and indistinct. It speaks not of activity, but of absence. It formed when human presence diminished enough for natural processes to dominate. Leaves fell and were not swept away. Timber collapsed and decayed. Animals burrowed. Roots spread. Over generations, the remnants of Roman Londinium were broken down into soil. Walls became low mounds. Roads disappeared beneath sediment. For archaeologists, dark earth is both challenging and revealing. It lacks the clear artifacts of bustling life, yet it tells a powerful story. It marks a pause in urban continuity, a rare moment when a great city almost ceased to exist. Beneath Trafalgar Square, this layer represents a time when the land was neither fully urban nor entirely wild. It was something in between. Perhaps a few scattered dwellings remained. Perhaps travelers passed through occasionally. But the organized city was gone. Written records from this era are scarce. Roman chroniclers had left. Anglo-Saxon sources would not appear for generations. The silence in the ground mirrors the silence in history. This absence forces historians to listen more closely to the soil itself. Environmental evidence suggests that trees reclaimed much of the abandoned city. Pollen analysis reveals increased woodland growth. Wild grasses spread. The Thames continued its course, unconcerned with human decline. Floodplains expanded and contracted with the seasons. The river, once lined with warehouses and docks, became quieter. Its banks softened. Without regular dredging or construction, silt accumulated. Marshes formed in low-lying areas. The landscape returned to an older rhythm. Human life did not vanish entirely. Small communities likely survived on the fringes, making use of Roman ruins for shelter or materials. Stone blocks were reused. Tiles were scavenged. Broken structures provided protection from wind and rain. These people lived simply. Their needs were immediate. They farmed, hunted, and fished. Trade networks shrank. Travel became local. The grand scale of Roman life was replaced by modest routines. The old roads still existed, but many fell into disuse. Vegetation narrowed them. Some paths shifted. New tracks formed where people actually walked. Movement followed practical necessity rather than imperial design. The memory of Londinium faded as well. Without written history, the stories of Roman Britain became fragmented. Names were forgotten. Buildings lost their purpose. Ruins were simply part of the landscape, useful but unexplained. Over time, new cultural influences arrived. Anglo-Saxon groups settled in parts of Britain, bringing their own traditions and languages. They established new centers of power elsewhere, often avoiding the old Roman city, for reasons still debated. Early Anglo-Saxon settlers seem to have preferred fresh ground rather than occupying Londinium directly. The abandoned city may have felt strange or unwelcoming, too large, too empty, too burdened with an unfamiliar past. And so for generations, the heart of what would become London lay quiet. The dark earth continued to grow, layer by layer. Each year added a thin trace of organic matter. Each decade softened the outlines of stone and street. This process was slow beyond human perception. No one witnessed the city vanish. It simply dissolved into the ground beneath people's feet. What makes this period remarkable is its length. For nearly 3 centuries, London existed only as a shadow of itself. Few cities experience such an extended pause. Fewer still leave such a subtle record behind. When activity eventually returned in the early medieval period, it did not erase the dark earth. New structures were built on top of it. Paths crossed it. Foundations pressed into it. The quiet centuries remain sealed below. Modern excavations reveal this layer as a dark band between Romang and medieval London. It is tangible evidence of absence, a reminder that history is not always continuous progress. Beneath Trafalgar Square, this dark earth represents a time when the land was allowed to rest. No monuments rose. No crowds gathered. The ground absorbed memory without ceremony. Today, as the square bustles with visitors and traffic, it is difficult to imagine such stillness. Yet only a few meters below, the soil holds that silence intact. The dark earth does not speak loudly. It does not display artifacts neatly arranged. Instead, it invites patience. It asks us to accept that sometimes the most important historical moments are those when very little happens. This was a time when London nearly vanished, not through destruction, but through neglect and forgetting. And in that forgetting, the land reclaimed its place. As night falls over modern London, and the sounds of the city soften, the dark earth remains beneath it all. It remembers a time without noise, without walls, without empire. A time when the city slept not for hours, but for centuries. And beneath Trafalgar Square, that long sleep still lingers, pressed gently into the ground, waiting quietly beneath the weight of history above. After centuries of quiet and abandonment, the land that had once been Romang Londinium slowly began to stir again. This awakening was not sudden, nor was it planned. It unfolded gradually, over generations, as people returned to the Thames and rediscovered the value of the old city's location. By the early medieval period, life had begun to reappear among the ruins, and London, though very different from its Romang ancestor, started once more to take shape. The early medieval settlement grew cautiously. People reused what the Romans had left behind. Broken walls became foundations. Old roads guided new paths. Stone was scavenged from abandoned buildings and shaped into churches, homes, and boundary markers. The past was not restored. It was absorbed. By the time of the Norman conquest in 1066, London had become one of the most important towns in England. Its population grew steadily, drawn by trade, protection, and opportunity. The Thames was again crowded with boats carrying goods from across the country and beyond. Markets expanded. Crafts flourished. The city awakened fully from its long sleep. Medieval London was dense and noisy by the standards of its time, yet fragile by modern ones. Houses were built close together, often of timber and plaster, with thatched roofs. Streets were narrow and winding. Waste was difficult to manage. Fires were frequent. Disease spread easily. Despite these challenges, the city continued to grow. Guilds organized craftsmen and merchants. Trade networks connected London to Europe. Goods such as wool, cloth, wine, spices, and metalwork passed through the city's markets. Religion shaped nearly every aspect of daily life. Churches and monasteries dotted the city and its outskirts. Bells marked the passage of time. Religious festivals structured the calendar. Prayer was woven into work, travel, and rest. Monasteries were not only places of worship, but centers of learning, charity, and burial. They owned land, managed resources, and provided care for the poor and sick. Many of these institutions maintained burial grounds where generations of Londoners were laid to rest. The concept of sacred ground remained powerful. Burial close to a church was believed to bring spiritual protection. As a result, graveyards filled quickly. When space ran out, bones were often moved to charnel houses, and new burials took their place. The dead remained present, layered beneath the living dot as London expanded beyond its old Roman walls. New burial grounds were established along roads and near religious institutions. Over time, these too filled and were reused. The ground beneath the city became dense with human remains, compressed by necessity and belief. Nowhere was this layering more intense than during times of crisis. Plague struck London repeatedly throughout the medieval period. The most devastating outbreak, occurring in the mid-14th century during the Black Death. This disease arrived quietly, carried by trade routes and ships, and spread rapidly through crowded neighborhoods. The plague overwhelmed the city. Mortality was sudden and widespread. Families disappeared. Entire streets fell silent. Normal burial practices could not keep pace with the number of deaths. Emergency burial pits were dug. Bodies were laid to rest quickly, often without markers or ceremony. These mass graves added new layers to the city's soil. Archaeological excavations have uncovered such pits, revealing the scale of loss and the urgency of response. The dead were placed with care, but without time. The priority was containment, not commemoration. Even after the plague subsided, its presence lingered. Londoners lived with the constant awareness of mortality. Death was familiar. It shaped art, literature, and religious thought. Churchyards became places of reflection as much as burial. Life continued nonetheless. Markets reopened. Houses were rebuilt. Children were born. The city adapted and endured, carrying the memory of loss beneath its streets. The medieval economy relied heavily on physical labor. Craftsmen worked long hours in workshops near their homes. Apprentices lived with masters. Animals were kept within city limits. The boundaries between domestic, commercial, and industrial spaces were blurred. Waste management remained a challenge. Refuse accumulated in streets and yards. Layers of debris built up over time, raising ground levels slowly but steadily. Each generation lived slightly higher than the last, building atop the remains of earlier lives. Fires periodically reshaped neighborhoods. When buildings burned, rubble was often leveled rather than removed. New structures rose on top of old debris. This practice added further layers to the city's surface. The area around what is now Trafalgar Square lay just beyond the medieval city's densest core. It was influenced by nearby activity, but remained more open than the crowded districts within the walls. Fields, religious houses, and burial grounds occupied parts of this landscape at different times. Over centuries, paths crossed this ground. Processions passed through. The dead were carried to burial. The living moved quietly above those already laid to rest. Medieval London was a city of continuity rather than clean breaks. The past was never erased. It was compressed. Roman foundations lay beneath medieval streets. Medieval graves cut into Roman debris. Each layer told a story of adaptation. The weight of the dead was not only physical, but symbolic. Ancestors were believed to remain connected to the living. Burial grounds were respected spaces, rarely disturbed intentionally. When they were reused, it was done with ritual awareness. As the medieval period progressed, London grew ever more complex. Legal systems developed. Governance became more formal. The city gained charters and privileges. Yet beneath this organization remained a fragile balance between life and death. Disease never disappeared entirely. Smaller outbreaks followed the Black Death. Each left its mark in the soil. Each added another chapter to the buried history of the city. By the end of the medieval era, London was firmly established as England's primary urban center. Its population was large by contemporary standards. Its influence extended across the kingdom, and yet, beneath this success lay centuries of accumulation of work, belief, suffering, and burial. The ground beneath the city was no longer natural soil. It was a human-made landscape shaped by countless lives. Under Trafalgar Square today, these medieval layers remain. They hold traces of markets, monasteries, and burial grounds. They carry the quiet weight of those who lived and died long before the modern city existed. As night falls and the square grows calmer, the living walk above centuries of memory. The dead remain below, undisturbed, part of the foundation upon which London stands. The medieval city may be gone, but it is not lost. It is compressed into the earth, resting beneath stone and time, reminding us that every city is built not just on land, but on lives. And so, beneath Trafalgar Square, the medieval world continues its silent vigil, holding its place in the long layered story of London. As one stands today upon Trafalgar Square, surrounded by the bustle of modern London, the presence of history is almost invisible. Stone and pavement dominate the scene. Tourists wander past fountains and statues. Cars hum along nearby streets. Yet beneath this seemingly ordinary surface lies a rich, uninterrupted story that stretches back thousands of years, layers upon layers of human experience, carefully preserved in soil, stone, and hidden structures. The ground under the square is not flat history, nor a single chapter carefully written. It is a palimpsest, each generation leaving traces atop what came before. Beneath the modern city lies Ramon Londinium, with its roads, bathhouses, and timber and stone dwellings. Below those lie the remains of Iron Age settlements, Neolithic ritual grounds, Paleolithic camps, and even the primeval landscapes of Ice Age Britain. Trafalgar Square is a quiet witness to the full arc of human occupation in this region. The story begins with the very soil itself. Archaeologists speak of stratigraphy, a method of reading layers of earth as one would read a book. Each stratum represents a period of human or natural activity. In central London, these layers are remarkably well preserved, compressed over millennia by successive construction, occupation, decay, and rebuilding. The dark earth of post-Roman abandonment rests beneath medieval foundations. Roman streets and walls lie buried below later stone and timber. Neolithic deposits, sometimes just fragments of pottery or bones, remain faint but enduring. And beneath all, the contours of rivers, marshes, and prehistoric landscapes remain faintly etched in the earth. Water has played a profound role in shaping what now lies beneath Trafalgar Square. The Thames, a constant presence through time, was both boundary and lifeline. In addition, smaller tributaries and streams once meandered across this part of the city, some now lost, redirected, or culverted beneath stone. Archaeologists have discovered traces of these streams, sometimes as wet, silted layers of soil, sometimes as channels lined with remang or medieval masonry. The very flow of water influenced where people built, worshipped, and buried their dead. It carried offerings and refuse alike, preserving accidental histories that speak quietly to modern researchers. Remang Londinium, though no longer visible above ground, remains remarkably present beneath the square. Excavations have revealed fragments of paved roads, foundations of timber and stone buildings, drainage channels, and pottery discarded or lost long ago. These remains tell us about the rhythms of daily life, where markets may have stood, where craftsmen worked, and where citizens walked from one street to another. Even the carefully measured Roman grid is faintly detectable beneath modern streets, a whisper of order in a city otherwise transformed. Medieval London added further complexity. Markets, churches, monasteries, and residential streets reshaped the landscape. Burial grounds expanded, often repeatedly reused over centuries. Plague pits, mass graves, and individual burials accumulated, compressing human life and death into layers of earth. Timber houses and their collapsed roofs added organic matter, slowly contributing to the dark earth that archaeologists now study as a record of absence and decay. These layers coexist with the underlying Roman infrastructure, creating a vertical narrative of human occupation. Royal processions, state ceremonies, and public events have further shaped the square's surface, though they leave little trace in the soil itself. Yet the locations chosen for such processions often corresponded with historical thoroughfares, invisible in the ground but discernible through archaeological mapping. The paths people follow, whether for duty, commerce, or celebration, are rarely new. They echo routes established hundreds, sometimes thousands of years before. The act of building the square itself in the 19th century was a careful exercise in layering history over history. Architects and planners leveled ground, moved soil, and constructed foundations. Yet even then, fragments of earlier eras remained, carefully recorded or sometimes inadvertently buried beneath the modern stone. Each stone laid for the square, each monument erected, became a thin skin over a landscape rich with memory. Excavations in and around the square occasionally reveal these buried treasures. Roman coins, medieval pottery shards, fragments of carved stone, and even prehistoric flint tools have been uncovered. Each object is a whisper from the past, a fragment of human activity preserved beneath the noise and motion of contemporary life. They remind us that every city block is composed not only of visible structures, but of thousands of years of silent, accumulated human presence. The notion of sacred or meaningful space, evident in Neolithic and Celtic times, persisted subtly into later eras. Cemeteries, churches, and public gathering areas often followed patterns established long before. Rituals adapted, beliefs changed, yet the underlying geography retained its influence. The very ground itself guided human activity, directing processions, marking burial sites, and framing communal space. Even modern construction subways, tunnels, and foundations interacts with this layered history. Engineers often encounter Roman walls, medieval foundations, or remnants of older waterways. These discoveries, though inconvenient for construction, provide remarkable insights into the continuity of life beneath London. Trafalgar Square, like much of the city, rests upon a complex and sometimes fragile archive of human endeavor. Time, in this context, is not linear. The modern city does not replace the past. It coexists with it. Each generation builds upon the achievements, failures, and traces of those who came before. The silence of centuries, the burial of streets, walls, and ritual sites, all exist concurrently beneath our feet. The square above is a living, bustling place. Below lies a quiet museum of human life, layered in earth, stone, and memory. Consider the scale of this history. Thousands of years, compressed into mere meters beneath modern pavement. Ice Age landscapes with migrating animals. Stone Age hunters walking along the Thames. Neolithic rituals in sacred groves. Celtic tribal gatherings. Roman engineering and urban life. Post-Roman abandonment and dark earth. Medieval markets, churches, plague, and graves. And finally, the modern square itself, bustling with tourists and vehicles. All these eras coexist, silent, beneath the surface. Understanding this continuity transforms our perception of the city. Modern London is not only a capital of commerce and government, it is a living archive. It is both place and memory, tangible and invisible. Every stone, every layer of pavement, rests upon the accumulated efforts, hopes, and deaths of countless generations. The quiet presence of these layers encourages reflection. Life is ephemeral, yet the traces we leave, roads, tools, structures, rituals, and even the simple act of living can endure. Trafalgar Square, monumental and lively, is only one layer of a much larger narrative. An above-ground reflection of the invisible centuries beneath. Archaeology allows us to read this hidden city. It requires patience, care, and respect for the complexity of time. It reveals that human history is rarely clean or tidy. It is messy, layered, and full of surprises. The Thames, the soil, the stones, and the remains of past buildings all tell a story of persistence, adaptation, and memory. The rivers that once meandered across the landscape, now hidden in culverts and drains, still influence the ground. Buried walls, foundations, and roadbeds continue to affect construction and settlement patterns. Even the placement of monuments and fountains in the square respects subtle cues established centuries before. At night, when modern London quiets, it is possible to imagine these layers more vividly. Beneath the square, the ghosts of the past are not spectral, they are material, resting in soil and stone. They are present in the silence, the weight of earth, and the contours of underground remains. Each layer interacts with the others, a continuous record of human occupation and adaptation. For the boring history for sleep listener, this is the perfect meditation. A city that never truly rests, yet does so quietly beneath our awareness. Trafalgar Square is not merely a civic space. It is a marker atop millennia, a surface upon which the stories of hunters, Druids, Romans, medieval citizens, and countless unnamed individuals converge. Modern construction, art, and ceremony continue the dialogue between past and present. Each layer influences the next. Each stone rests upon the foundations of centuries of human endeavor. The city above cannot escape the history beneath. It is held, sustained, and shaped by it. And so, beneath the fountains, statues, and crowds of Trafalgar Square lies an extraordinary archive. Thousands of years of human presence, ritual, labor, and life, compressed into soil, stone, and sediment. It is a quiet testament to continuity, endurance, and the remarkable depth of time. Standing above it, one is walking upon centuries. Standing still, one is listening to millennia. And if one closes their eyes, it is possible to feel, very faintly, the pulse of the many generations resting beneath, patient, silent, and enduring. Beneath modern stone and living streets alike, the square is alive above, yet eternal below. It is both present and past, a reminder that London is not built on land alone, but upon the countless lives that preceded it, layer upon layer, century upon century, waiting quietly beneath our feet.